The furious investor slammed his hand onto the conference table. "This deal is over!" Nobody dared answer. Then the plus-size secretary stepped between them. She smiled. The investor's anger faded. Laughter replaced shouting. The billion-dollar agreement was saved. Seconds later, a deep voice cut through the silence. "Everyone out!" The handsome mafia boss stared only at her. "Don't smile at another man again." Nobody in the room could believe what they had just heard. For several seconds, nobody moved. Elena Ashford stood beside the conference table, still holding the revised agreement she had somehow managed to rescue from disaster. Across from her, Adrian Whitmore was no longer the furious investor who had threatened to walk away moments earlier. His shoulders had relaxed. The anger in his face had disappeared. But nobody was looking at Adrian anymore. Every pair of eyes had turned toward Nikolai Vescari. The chairman of Vescari Global stood at the entrance with one hand in his trouser pocket, his expression perfectly composed. That was what made his words so unsettling. Nikolai never lost control. Executives feared his silence more than other men's shouting. He could dismantle a disastrous proposal with 3 questions, end an argument with a glance, and make powerful men reconsider their careers without raising his voice. Yet he had just told his secretary not to smile at another man. Elena blinked. "Excuse me?" Nikolai's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Everyone out." That command, at least, everyone understood. Chairs moved immediately. Board members collected folders with remarkable urgency. Lawyers who had spent the previous hour arguing over microscopic contract clauses suddenly discovered an extraordinary ability to leave a room without speaking. Adrian paused beside Elena. "You saved this negotiation, Miss Ashford." Elena smiled automatically. "I'm glad we could resolve the misunderstanding." Nikolai's eyes dropped to her smile. Adrian extended his hand. It was impressive. Before Elena could respond, Nikolai stepped closer. "Mr. Whitmore." Just his name. Nothing more. Adrian slowly lowered his hand. A faint trace of amusement crossed his face before he followed the others outside. Matteo Ricci was the last person remaining near the door. Unlike everyone else, Matteo did not look nervous. He looked dangerously close to entertained. Nikolai noticed. Something amusing? Not remotely. Matteo's expression remained solemn. His eyes did not. Nikolai stared at him. Matteo wisely left. The door closed. Silence settled over the conference room. Elena placed the agreement carefully on the table. She had worked for Nikolai for nearly 3 years. She knew how he took his coffee, which meetings he considered wastes of time, which executives exaggerated their quarterly projections, and exactly how long to wait before interrupting him when something urgent happened. She had seen him furious. She had seen him receive news that would have terrified ordinary men and respond by calmly adjusting his cufflinks. But this made no sense. "Mr. Vescari," she said carefully, "did I do something wrong?" His gaze shifted to her. "No." "Then I'm confused. You prevented Whitmore from terminating the agreement." "Yes." "You corrected a misunderstanding our legal department failed to identify." "Yes." "You protected a transaction worth more than $1 billion." Elena waited. That sounds suspiciously like praise. "It is." "Then we're making progress." For one dangerous second, something almost softened in Nikolai's expression. Almost. Then he remembered Adrian laughing at something Elena had said. The softness disappeared. "You didn't need to smile at him." Elena stared. "He was furious." "I noticed. I was calming him down. You could have done that without smiling." She folded her arms. "How?" Nikolai opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Elena waited. The most feared man in the city appeared to have encountered a problem for which he had no prepared answer. Finally, she asked, "Would you have preferred I scowled at the man holding a billion-dollar contract?" His eyes narrowed. "That isn't what I said." "No. You told me not to smile at another man again." Nikolai suddenly seemed to hear his own sentence for the first time. A muscle moved in his jaw. Elena's lips twitched. "Mr. Vescari, are you feeling all right?" "Perfectly." "Should I call your doctor?" "No." "Matteo?" "Absolutely not." That nearly made her laugh. She collected her papers instead. "I'll have the revised agreement prepared for your signature." She walked toward the door, then stopped beside him. "For the record, I smile at people because it's part of being pleasant." Nikolai looked down at her. "You're pleasant too often." Elena finally laughed. Then she walked out. Nikolai remained completely still. A moment later, Matteo quietly leaned back through the doorway. "Should I have security confiscate smiles now, or are we limiting the policy to Miss Ashford?" Nikolai turned his head. Matteo disappeared. For the first time in years, Nikolai Vescari had faced a problem he couldn't intimidate, negotiate with, or control. And the worst part was that Elena had walked away, believing he was simply being unreasonable. She had no idea that while an entire boardroom had been celebrating the deal she saved, Nikolai had noticed only one thing. Another man had made her smile. The flowers arrived the following morning. Not a modest bouquet. Not something that could be placed discreetly beside Elena's computer. The arrangement was enormous. White roses, pale pink peonies, and enough greenery to make the executive floor look as though someone had relocated part of a botanical garden into Vescari Global. The receptionist personally delivered it. "Elena, these are for you." Every head within 20 feet turned. Elena stared at the flowers. "For me?" "There's a card." That made 3 assistants suddenly become interested in walking past her desk. Elena pulled the small envelope free. "Thank you for saving yesterday's negotiation. Intelligence under pressure is rare." "So is grace." "Adrian Whitmore." Elena smiled. Unfortunately, that was the exact moment Nikolai stepped out of his office. He stopped. His eyes moved from Elena to the card, to the flowers, then back to Elena. The executive floor became suspiciously quiet. "Who sent those?" Elena looked up. "Mr. Whitmore." Nikolai's expression did not change. That was never a good sign. "Why?" "To thank me." "For what?" Elena slowly lowered the card. "The billion-dollar deal I saved yesterday?" A cough came from nearby. Matteo stood beside the elevators, holding a folder against his chest. He looked down quickly. Nikolai noticed. "Ricci." "Yes. Do you have something to say?" "Not unless you'd like my opinion on floral arrangements." "No." "Excellent." Matteo walked away. Nikolai returned his attention to the bouquet. "How did those get upstairs?" Elena frowned. "The elevator." His gaze sharpened. "I mean through security." "They're flowers. They're an unidentified delivery sent directly to the executive floor." Elena looked at the roses, then at Nikolai. "Are you suggesting the peonies are armed?" Several employees immediately found reasons to stare at their screens. Nikolai ignored them. "Anything delivered to this floor should be inspected." They were. "Thoroughly?" Elena's eyes narrowed. "You're serious?" "Completely." Nikolai picked up his phone. "Security." Elena stood. "Mr. Vescari," he continued as though she hadn't spoken. "Remove the floral arrangement outside Miss Ashford's office." Her mouth fell open. "They're my flowers. They're a security risk. They're roses." Potential security risk. Nikolai. Silence. She almost never used his first name at work. His gaze immediately shifted to her. For 1 second, the irritation in his expression disappeared. Then he seemed to remember the card. Security will remove them. Elena stared at him. You are unbelievable. She turned and walked toward the records room. Nikolai watched her leave. Matteo appeared beside him almost instantly. Very convincing. Nikolai didn't look at him. What is? The security concern. There is a security concern. Of course. Unsolicited packages are dangerous. Terrifying. Nikolai finally faced him. Matteo nodded toward the bouquet. Especially pink peonies. Nikolai's stare could have frozen glass. Matteo remained professionally thoughtful. Should I order ballistic testing? Go away. I'll notify the bomb squad. Matteo. Going. But Matteo only made it 3 steps before Nikolai spoke again. Wait. Matteo turned. Nikolai looked toward the records room where Elena had disappeared. Did she like them? There was a pause. Matteo's eyebrows rose. You want my professional assessment? Yes. She smiled. Nikolai's jaw tightened. Matteo nearly lost the battle with his expression. Interesting, he murmured. What? Nothing. Nikolai stepped closer. Say it. Matteo considered the man he had served for nearly 15 years. He had watched Nikolai negotiate with politicians, criminals, billionaires, and men who believed threats were substitutes for intelligence. Never once had he seen him rattled by flowers. You're jealous. Nikolai's expression became almost offended. I don't get jealous. Apparently nobody informed the peonies. I am protecting my employee. From gratitude? From inappropriate attention. Matteo glanced at the card. He thanked her for her intelligence. Excessively. It was 1 sentence. 1 unnecessary sentence. Matteo finally smiled. Nikolai pointed toward the elevator. Leave. This time, Matteo obeyed. 10 minutes later, Elena returned. The flowers were gone. She stopped beside her empty desk. For a moment, genuine disappointment crossed her face. Nikolai saw it through the glass wall of his office. Something uncomfortable tightened in his chest. He had expected satisfaction when the flowers disappeared. Instead, watching Eleanor sit down without them felt strangely like losing an argument he had never understood. Her phone rang. She answered with her usual warmth. Executive office, Elena Ashford speaking. Then she laughed softly at something the caller said. Nikolai looked up immediately. Through the glass, Matteo saw him. Their eyes met. Matteo slowly raised 1 eyebrow. Nikolai closed the blinds. That afternoon, he approved 3 acquisitions, rejected 2 proposals, resolved a problem that had occupied the legal department for weeks, and spent an unreasonable amount of time wondering who had made Elena laugh on the phone. For a man who controlled almost everything around him, the realization was deeply irritating. Because Nikolai Vescari was beginning to suspect that the problem had never been Adrian Whitmore. It wasn't the flowers, it wasn't security, it wasn't even Eleanor's smile. The problem was that he wanted to be the reason for it, and he had absolutely no idea what to do with that. Elena decided there was only one reasonable explanation for Nikolai's behavior. Her boss was strange, brilliant, intimidating, occasionally impossible, but strange. It was easier to believe that than consider any alternative. So the next morning, she arrived at 7:45 as usual, organized his schedule, moved an unnecessary strategy meeting out of his afternoon, and left his coffee beside the financial reports before he entered his office. Good morning, Mr. Vescari. Nikolai stopped beside her desk. Good morning. His gaze moved across the empty corner where Adrian's flowers had once stood. Elena noticed. No dangerous vegetation today. His eyes returned to hers. Very funny. I thought so. She smiled. And there it was again. That uncomfortable tightening in his chest. Except this time, the smile was for him. Nikolai walked into his office feeling considerably less irritated than a man should after being mocked by his secretary. The problem became worse throughout the day. Elena smiled at everyone. She smiled at the elderly maintenance supervisor when he brought her a replacement desk lamp. She smiled at a nervous junior analyst who had accidentally scheduled 2 executives into the same conference room. She even smiled at the delivery man carrying 12 boxes of financial documents. By noon, Nikolai had discovered something deeply inconvenient. Adrian Whitmore wasn't special. That should have made him feel better. It did not. At lunch, Matteo entered Nikolai's office carrying 2 folders. Quarterly Security Review. Nikolai signed the first page without reading it. Matteo waited. Nothing. He placed the second folder down. Nikolai signed that one too. Matteo looked toward the glass wall. Elena was speaking with Daniel, a young attorney from the legal department. Daniel said something. Elena laughed. Nikolai's pen stopped. Matteo followed his gaze. Ah. Nikolai looked down. Don't. I didn't say anything. You were going to. I was going to discuss security. Then discuss security. Matteo opened the folder. The Eastern warehouse cameras need upgrading. Approved. We should replace the access system downstairs. Approved. And perhaps forbid male employees from speaking to Miss Ashford. Nikolai looked up. Matteo's face remained perfectly serious. Get out. Security review concluded. He collected the folders. Outside, Elena was helping Daniel correct a scheduling problem. She wasn't flirting. There was nothing calculated in the way she spoke to people. Her warmth was effortless because she offered it without expecting anything in return. That was precisely what Nikolai had failed to understand. For years, people had approached him because they wanted something. Money, influence, protection, access. Fear made some obedient. Ambition made others charming. Elena was different. 3 years earlier, during her first month at Vescari Global, she'd found him alone in his office after midnight. She hadn't asked why he was still there. She hadn't tried to impress him. She had simply placed a sandwich beside his laptop. You skipped dinner. I wasn't hungry. You'll be hungry eventually. Then she'd returned to her desk. He had eaten the sandwich 20 minutes later. She never mentioned it. There had been dozens of moments like that. Coffee appearing before brutal meetings. A rescheduled appointment when she noticed he hadn't slept. A quiet warning when an executive was lying. Never dramatic. Never demanding recognition. Nikolai had spent years treating those gestures as evidence that Elena was exceptionally competent. Only now was he beginning to wonder when competence had become something else. That afternoon, Elena entered his office, carrying documents. You moved my 4 o'clock meeting. Yes. Why? Because you've been working since 6 this morning. I can work? I know. It's one of your more alarming hobbies. She placed the documents down. You have 45 minutes free. Eat something. Nikolai stared at her. Elena misunderstood the silence. If you're about to tell me lunch is inefficient, I've already ordered it. You ordered my lunch? You would forget. How do you know? Because you forgot yesterday. Nikolai leaned back. And the day before. A smile touched his mouth before he could stop it. Elena froze. It was tiny, barely there. But she had worked for this man for 3 years. Nikolai Vescari. The smile vanished. Did you just smile? No. You did. You're imagining things. Elena grinned. I knew you could. Then she left, pleased with herself. Nikolai watched the door close. A minute later, Matteo entered. He looked at Nikolai, then at the door, then back at Nikolai. What? Matteo shook his head. Nothing. For once, he wasn't laughing, because the situation had stopped looking like simple jealousy. Nikolai wasn't merely irritated when Elena gave her warmth to other people. He was changing because she gave some of that warmth to him. And Elena, the woman who could read an angry boardroom in seconds, remained completely unaware that the most emotionally guarded man she had ever met was slowly falling in love with her. The first rumor reached Elena on a Tuesday morning. Nobody told her directly. They didn't have to. Office gossip had a particular rhythm. Conversation stopped when she entered the elevator. People who normally greeted her suddenly became fascinated by their phones. Two assistants whispered near the coffee station until Elena approached, then separated so quickly it would have been funny under different circumstances. By lunchtime, she understood enough. Apparently, Elena Ashford wasn't good at her job. She was charming. There was a difference, at least according to Vanessa Caldwell. Vanessa had spent 7 years building her position as Director of Corporate Affairs. Elegant, polished, and ruthlessly ambitious, she understood exactly how rumors survived in corporations. Never make an accusation. Ask a question. I only wonder whether clients would respond the same way if another secretary handled the negotiations. That sentence became, Eleanor used her appearance to influence clients. Then someone remembered Adrian's flowers. By afternoon, the story had evolved again. Eleanor was deliberately flirting with investors to make herself indispensable to Nikolai. When a junior assistant finally tried to warn her, Elena merely closed the calendar on her computer. I know. You know? I have ears. Aren't you going to do something? Elena considered it. No. The assistant stared at her. They're questioning your professionalism. And if I run around demanding everyone believe me, they'll have something new to discuss tomorrow. But it's unfair. Yes. Elena's voice remained calm. Unfair things don't become true because they're repeated. She returned to her work. What nobody noticed was how tightly she held her pen. Elena had spent years becoming excellent at a job people underestimated. She knew how quickly competence could be dismissed when it belonged to a woman others found easy to categorize. Too warm meant flirtatious. Too confident meant arrogant. Too quiet meant weak. She had learned long ago that defending herself against every assumption would consume more energy than doing the work itself. So she worked. Nikolai noticed anyway. He noticed Elena stopped eating lunch in the executive lounge. He noticed she spoke less during meetings. Most importantly, he noticed that when people approached her desk, her smile appeared a fraction later than it used to. On Wednesday evening, Matteo entered Nikolai's office and found him reading internal email logs. That looks healthy. Nikolai didn't glance up. Who started it? Matteo's humor disappeared. He knew exactly what Nikolai meant. We're tracing the first conversations. I want facts. You'll have them. Nikolai finally looked up. Quietly. Matteo studied him. That isn't your usual preference. No. Usually, when someone created a problem inside Nikolai's organization, the problem discovered very quickly that it had made a mistake. But this was different. Elena had spent years earning respect. If Nikolai publicly destroyed everyone, repeating the rumor without evidence, people would only decide she needed his protection because the rumors were true. He refused to make her smaller while trying to defend her. Find the source, Nikolai said. Document everything. Matteo nodded. And then? Nikolai's expression hardened. Then Elena won't need to defend herself. Across the floor, Vanessa approached Elena's desk. Elena. Elena looked up. Vanessa. I heard some unpleasant things are being said. How unfortunate. Vanessa smiled sympathetically. You know how people can be. I do. Perhaps you should be more careful with clients. People misunderstand friendliness. Elena held her gaze. There it was. Not an accusation. Advice. Perfectly polished. Perfectly poisonous. Elena smiled. Thank you for your concern. Vanessa's expression shifted slightly. You don't seem upset. I don't usually give strangers control over my mood. For the first time, Vanessa's smile looked strained. She walked away. Inside his office, Nikolai had witnessed the entire exchange through the glass. He couldn't hear the words. He didn't need to. Elena sat down and continued working. But when she thought nobody was watching, she released a slow breath and pressed her fingers briefly against her eyes. Nikolai stood. Every instinct he possessed told him to walk outside and end the matter immediately. He stopped himself, not because Vanessa deserved patience, because Elena deserved proof. His phone vibrated. A message from Matteo appeared. We found something. Nikolai read the next line. His face became completely still. Then he looked through the glass at Vanessa Caldwell. For years, people had mistaken Nikolai's silence for mercy. Vanessa was about to discover the difference. The confrontation came 2 days later. Elena entered the executive conference room, carrying revised projections for a private acquisition meeting. Nikolai sat at the head of the table. Matteo stood near the windows. Vanessa occupied a seat on the opposite side, her expression composed despite the investigation quietly unfolding around her. The final attendee was Richard Hale, a senior executive representing one of the companies involved in the acquisition. Elena distributed the documents. Mr. Hale, you'll find the adjusted valuation on page 14. Richard glanced at the page. Then at Elena. I'd rather hear you explain it. Of course. She stepped beside the presentation screen. The adjustment reflects the revised revenue forecast and... No. Richard stood. Come here. Show me. Elena paused. The document was directly in front of him. Still, she approached. Richard moved closer. Too close. Elena took half a step back. He followed. The numbers here, she said, pointing toward the page. Richard wasn't looking at the numbers. I've heard a lot about you lately. Elena's expression cooled. Then you've heard I'm very good at my job? Matteo's gaze sharpened. Across the table, Nikolai became completely still. Richard smiled. I've heard you're very good at keeping important men happy. Silence. Elena slowly lowered her hand. Vanessa looked down. It lasted less than a second, but Matteo saw it. So did Nikolai. Elena met Richard's eyes. If you have a question about the acquisition, I'll answer it. If you don't, I suggest you sit down. Richard chuckled. Don't be sensitive. He leaned closer. Elena stepped back again. This time, Richard reached toward her waist, as if to guide her back toward the document. He never touched her. A hand closed around his wrist. Nikolai. Nobody had seen him leave his chair. His expression was calm. His eyes were not. Step away from my secretary. Richard froze. Nikolai released his wrist. Richard immediately moved back. I wasn't doing anything. I saw what you were doing. It was a misunderstanding. No. Nikolai stepped between him and Elena. It was a boundary. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Richard attempted a laugh. Viscari, surely we're not going to derail a multi-million-dollar acquisition Because your secretary can't handle a little, respect is not optional in this company. The words were quiet, absolute. Richard's smile vanished. Nikolai continued. You will address Miss Ashford according to her professional role. You will maintain appropriate distance, and you will never attempt to touch her without permission. Richard glanced around the room. Everyone was watching. Even Vanessa. You're embarrassing me over nothing. No, you embarrassed yourself. Nikolai pointed toward the door. The meeting is over for you. Richard stared at him. You need my approval for this acquisition. I needed your company. Nikolai's gaze didn't move. Whether I need you is a different question. Matteo lowered his eyes, hiding the faintest hint of satisfaction. Richard collected his folder. At the door, he turned toward Eleanor. I didn't mean to offend you, Eleanor answered evenly. Then next time, listen when a woman steps away. Richard left. The door closed. Nobody spoke. Nikolai turned toward Eleanor. His anger disappeared almost instantly. Are you all right? Yes. Did he touch you? No. Are you certain? Eleanor nodded. You stopped him. Something changed in Nikolai's face at those words. Not pride. Relief. Raw enough that Eleanor finally saw it. For weeks, she'd explained his behavior as strictness. The flowers, the questions, the ridiculous complaints about her smiling. But the man standing in front of her now wasn't worried about company policy. He was worried about her. Vanessa cleared her throat. Perhaps we should continue. Richard's behavior was inappropriate, obviously. But Eleanor is fine. Nikolai turned. The softness vanished. Did I ask you? Vanessa stiffened. No. Then don't decide whether she's fine. Elena looked at him sharply. Nikolai seemed to realize something. He turned back to her. Forgive me. You decide that. It was a small correction, but Elena understood its significance. This was a man accustomed to commanding rooms. Yet when it concerned her, he had stopped himself. He had protected her without taking away her voice. I am fine, Elena said quietly. Thank you. Nikolai nodded. The meeting resumed, but the atmosphere had changed. Everyone in that room now understood something that had previously existed only as gossip. Nikolai Viscari watched Elena differently. Not as an executive watching an employee. Not as a powerful man guarding something he owned. Something far more dangerous lived beneath his control. Care. After the meeting, Elena returned to her desk. Nikolai remained inside. Matteo waited until they were alone. You handled that well. Nikolai looked at him. He crossed a line. Yes. I would have done the same for any employee. Matteo was silent. Nikolai frowned. Why aren't you arguing? Because I agree. That surprised him. Matteo stepped closer. What matters isn't that you protected her. You should have. He glanced through the glass toward Elena. What matters is that you asked whether she was all right, instead of deciding for her. Nikolai followed his gaze. Elena was working again. But this time she looked toward his office. Their eyes met through the glass. She gave him a small smile. Nikolai didn't look away, and for the first time, Elena didn't dismiss what she saw in his expression as irritation, because she was beginning to understand that the most dangerous thing about Nikolai Viscari had never been his jealousy. It was how carefully he was learning to love someone without controlling her. The truth came out the following Monday. At 9 o'clock, Nikolai called a meeting of the executive leadership team. No explanation was given. That alone made everyone nervous. Elena entered with her notebook and took her usual place near the end of the conference table. Vanessa sat across from her. Matteo stood beside the screen. Nikolai entered last. He didn't sit. "Before we begin," he said, "we're going to correct something." Matteo activated the screen. A series of internal emails appeared, then message logs, then timestamps. Elena's stomach tightened. Vanessa's face lost a fraction of its color. Nikolai looked around the table. For the past 2 weeks, false statements concerning Miss Ashford's professional conduct have circulated through this company. Nobody moved. They suggested that her success with clients was the result of flirtation rather than competence. His voice remained controlled. "That allegation is false." Vanessa folded her hands. "Nikolai, surely an executive meeting isn't necessary for office gossip." His eyes shifted toward her. "It became necessary when a director created it." Silence. Vanessa froze. Matteo changed the screen. The first message appeared. It had been sent by Vanessa to a senior communications manager shortly after Adrian's flowers arrived. Interesting how certain employees discover unconventional ways to influence important clients. Another appeared, then another. None directly accused Elena. Each planted exactly the same suggestion. Vanessa recovered quickly. "These are private observations." "No," Nikolai said. "They're deliberate insinuations. I never instructed anyone to spread rumors." "You didn't need to." Vanessa's composure cracked. "This is absurd." Eleanor stared at the screen. She had suspected Vanessa. Seeing proof felt different. Not because the rumors suddenly hurt more, because they had been intentional. Vanessa looked toward Elena. "Surely you understand this has been exaggerated." Elena closed her notebook. "No." One word. "Calm." Vanessa blinked. Elena continued. "You knew exactly what people would assume. You just made certain someone else said it aloud." Several executives looked away. Nikolai watched Elena carefully. This was her moment. He would not take it from her. Vanessa straightened. "I was protecting the company's reputation. By damaging mine? You've received unusual attention from Mr. Vescari. That changed the room." Eleanor went still. Vanessa turned toward Nikolai. "And everyone knows it." Nikolai's expression hardened, but before he could speak, Elena did. "If Mr. Vescari's behavior toward me created confusion, then you could have questioned him." Her voice never rose. "You chose me because you assumed I was easier to damage." Vanessa had no answer. Nikolai finally stepped forward. "Miss Caldwell, you are suspended, effective, immediately pending formal disciplinary review." Vanessa stared at him. "After 7 years? Your 7 years here are the reason you should have known better." Security waited outside. Vanessa gathered her things and left without another word. When the door closed, Nikolai faced the room. "One more matter." His gaze settled on Eleanor. The shift in his expression was subtle, but she saw it. "The rumors about Miss Ashford are false. Her record speaks for itself." He paused. "However, there is one part of this situation for which I am responsible." Elena frowned. Nikolai continued. "My personal reactions created unnecessary attention around her." Matteo became very still. Nobody interrupted. "I allowed jealousy to affect how I behaved in this workplace." There it was. The word. Jealousy. Spoken publicly by a man whose reputation depended on never exposing weakness. Elena stared at him. "The flowers," Nikolai said. "My comments. My behavior toward Mr. Whitmore. None of that was Miss Ashford's responsibility." His voice lowered. "It was mine." For once, the room wasn't afraid of Nikolai Vescari. It was stunned by him. "I apologize to Miss Ashford for placing her in that position." Elena couldn't immediately speak. She remembered the conference room. Don't smile at another man again. She had thought it was arrogance, possessiveness, a powerful man irritated because something happened outside his control. Now she saw something else beneath it. Fear. Not fear that she would disobey him. Fear that someone else might become important to her. And he had handled that fear badly. More importantly, he knew it. The meeting ended quietly. Executives filed out. Elena remained seated. Nikolai dismissed Matteo with a glance. Matteo obeyed without a joke. When they were alone, Elena looked at Nikolai. You were jealous? He exhaled slowly. Yes. Of Adrian? Yes. The flowers? Yes. The attorney who made me laugh? Nikolai paused. Elena's eyes widened. You were. I wasn't particularly proud of that one. Despite everything, she laughed. Nikolai looked at her. Then his expression changed. Elena. Her laughter faded. I need you to understand something. What I feel does not give me the right to control you. She said nothing. You can smile at whoever you want. A faint smile returned to her lips. That's generous. I deserved that. Yes, you did. He almost smiled. Then his voice became quieter. I spent most of my life believing control was the same thing as strength. Elena watched him. And now? Nikolai looked directly into her eyes. Now I'm beginning to understand that caring about someone means accepting what you cannot control. Something shifted between them. Not a confession? Not yet. But the distance Elena had carefully maintained between herself and the most powerful man she'd ever known suddenly felt much smaller. For the first time, she understood his jealousy. And for the first time, Nikolai understood that if he wanted a place in Eleanor's life, he could never demand it. He would have to earn it. 3 weeks passed before Nikolai asked the question. Not because he hadn't thought about it. Because for perhaps the first time in his life, Nikolai Vescari was learning that wanting an answer did not entitle him to demand one. Things between them had changed quietly. Elena still managed his schedule. She still reminded him to eat. She still walked into his office without being intimidated by the men waiting outside. But now, sometimes, she stayed an extra minute. Sometimes Nikolai asked about her day instead of immediately asking for the next report. Sometimes Elena caught him looking at her, and neither of them pretended it hadn't happened. Matteo noticed everything. Naturally. One evening, he placed a folder on Nikolai's desk and glanced toward Elena, who was finishing emails outside. You know, most men eventually ask a woman to dinner. Nikolai didn't look up. Most men don't have you interfering. I believe that's unrelated. Leave. Matteo headed toward the door, then stopped. One piece of advice. I didn't ask. That's never stopped me. Nikolai looked up. Matteo's amusement faded. Don't order her to choose you. The words landed harder than the joke Nikolai had expected. Matteo continued. Give her a reason to. Then he left. At 8:30, the executive floor was empty. Elena shut down her computer and found Nikolai standing beside the windows in his office. His jacket was off. His tie was loosened. For once, he looked less like the untouchable chairman of Vescari Global and more like a tired man who had spent too many years making himself impossible to read. You're still here, Elena said. So are you. I was working. So was I. She smiled. That's exactly the problem. Nikolai watched her. There it was, the same smile that had started all of this. Warm, effortless, given without calculation. Elena, Something in his voice made her stop. Yes? Why do you smile at everyone? She blinked. Of all the questions she had expected, that wasn't one of them. You've been thinking about this for 3 weeks. Longer. She laughed softly. I believe that. Nikolai waited. Elena leaned against the edge of his desk. For a moment, she considered the question seriously. Then she said, because you never know who needs kindness more than confidence. Nikolai said nothing. Elena looked toward the darkened city beyond the windows. My mother used to tell me that people remember how safe they felt around you, long after they forget what you said. Her voice softened. I spent a lot of my life being judged before people knew me. Nikolai's expression changed. Elena continued before he could interrupt. Too big, too friendly, too ambitious for a secretary. Not polished enough for some rooms, too noticeable for others. She shrugged lightly. Eventually I realized I could either become colder, so nobody could hurt me, or remain the person I actually liked being. And you chose kindness? I chose myself. Nikolai absorbed that. Suddenly, her smile meant something entirely different. He had treated it as attention, something valuable because other men received it. But Elena's warmth wasn't an invitation. It was strength, a deliberate refusal to let other people's judgment determine who she became, and he had once tried to restrict it because he was afraid. I owe you another apology, he said. You've apologized. Not for misunderstanding you. Elena looked at him. Nikolai stepped closer, but stopped with space between them. I thought your smile was something other people could take from me. Her eyes softened. It was never yours to lose. I know. That answer mattered. Elena could see that he meant it. Nikolai lowered his voice. I don't want to own anything about you, Elena. The room seemed suddenly smaller. I just want the chance to become someone you choose. Her breath caught. For a man feared across the city, there was no command in his voice now, only vulnerability. Elena smiled. Nikolai's mouth curved slightly. Then save your most beautiful smile for me. Her eyebrows rose. Careful. What? That sounded suspiciously like another order. His smile disappeared. Elena laughed. Nikolai realized she was teasing him. I'm improving. Slowly. Painfully. That is character growth. This time Nikolai laughed. Not the almost smile she'd caught weeks earlier. A real laugh. Quiet, surprised, and so unfamiliar that Elena simply stared. What? She shook her head. Nothing. You're staring. I've never heard you laugh. You're enjoying this too much. Absolutely. Then Nikolai held out his hand, not taking hers, offering his. Dinner? Elena looked at his hand, then at him. Is this my boss asking? No. The chairman? No. The terrifying man who confiscates flowers. Nikolai sighed. That incident will follow me forever, won't it? Yes. He accepted the sentence with dignity. Elena, would you have dinner with me? She placed her hand in his. Yes. His fingers closed gently around hers. And this time, when Elena smiled at Nikolai Vescari, he finally understood. The smile wasn't beautiful, because it belonged to him. It was beautiful, because she had chosen to give it. 1 year later, another billion-dollar negotiation ended inside the same conference room where everything had begun. This time, nobody shouted. The agreement was signed beneath flashing cameras, while executives, investors, and journalists filled the room. Elena stood beside Nikolai. Not behind him. Beside him. She still worked at Vescari Global, although no longer as his executive secretary. Months earlier, She had accepted a newly created senior position overseeing executive operations and international client relations. She had earned it, and Nikolai had made certain everyone knew that. Across the room, Matteo raised his glass. Remarkable. Elena glanced at him. What is? A year ago, flowers nearly caused an international security incident. Nikolai looked at him. They were an unidentified delivery. Of course, Elena laughed. Nikolai sighed. Some things had changed. Matteo wasn't one of them. Neither, apparently, was Adrian Whitmore. He approached Elena with a grin. Congratulations, Mrs. Vescari. Thank you, Adrian. Nikolai appeared beside her almost immediately. Adrian looked at him. Still doing that? Doing what? Materializing whenever I speak to your wife. Nikolai calmly took a glass of champagne from a passing tray. Coincidence? Of course. Elena shook her head. The jealousy hadn't disappeared completely, but it had changed. It no longer came with commands. No confiscated flowers, no unreasonable rules. Now it appeared as an eyebrow raised across a crowded room or a hand offered quietly when Nikolai wanted her beside him. And Elena had learned something too. Behind all his discipline was a man who had spent most of his life believing love created vulnerabilities enemies could exploit. She had never forced him to become softer. She had simply shown him that tenderness and weakness were not the same thing. A journalist approached them. Mrs. Vescari, may I ask one question? Elena nodded. The journalist smiled. There's an old story around Vescari Global that your husband once told you not to smile at another man. Matteo nearly choked on his drink. Nikolai closed his eyes briefly. Elena looked delighted. The journalist continued. Do you still smile at every client? Elena considered the question with exaggerated seriousness. Then she glanced toward her husband. Only after checking whether my husband is watching. The room burst into laughter. Even Adrian applauded. Nikolai slipped an arm gently around Elena's waist. Good answer. She looked up at him. Was that approval? Survival instinct. Elena laughed again. This time, Nikolai laughed with her. A year earlier, he'd believed loving Elena meant wanting her warmth for himself. Now he understood better. He loved the woman who could walk into an angry room and make it kinder simply by refusing to become hard. Her smile had never been something for him to control. It was part of the woman he had fallen in love with. And Elena understood him too. So when the cameras turned toward them, she looked at the feared Mafia Boss who had once ordered an entire boardroom out because another man had made her smile. Then she smiled at him first. Not because he demanded it. Not because she belonged to him. Because after everything they had learned about respect, trust, and choosing each other, Nikolai Vescari had finally become the man she wanted to smile at first.